Australia Day. Australia Day is the official national day of Australia, observed annually on 26 January. It marks the anniversary of the 1788 arrival of the First Fleet at Port Jackson in New South Wales and the raising of the British flag at Sydney Cove by Arthur Phillip. In present-day Australia, celebrations aim to reflect the diverse society and the landscape of the nation, and are marked by community and family events, reflections on Australian history, official community awards, and citizenship ceremonies welcoming new members of the Australian community. The meaning and the significance of Australia Day has evolved and been contested over time, and not all states have celebrated the same date as the date of historical significance. Unofficially or historically, the date has also been variously named Anniversary Day, Foundation Day, and ANA Day. It is also known as Invasion Day and National Day of Mourning. The date of 26th century 1788 marked the proclamation of British sovereignty over the eastern seaboard of Australia, then known as New Holland. Although it was not known as Australia Day until over a century later, records of celebrations on 26 January date back to 1008. Date back on 1808 with the first official celebration of the formation of New South Wales held in 1818. On New Year's Day 1901, the British colonies of Australia formed a federation, marking the birth of modern Australia. A national day of unity and celebration was looked for. It was not until 1935 that all Australian states and territories adopted use of the term Australia Day to mark the date, and not until 1994 that the date was consistently marked by a public holiday on that day by all states and territories. In contemporary Australia, the holiday is marked by the presentation of the Australian of the Year awards on Australia Day Eve, announcement of the Australia Day honours list and addresses from the Governor General and the Prime Minister. It is an official public holiday in every state and territory, with community festivals, concerts, and citizenship ceremonies. The day is celebrated in large and small communities and cities around the nation. Australia Day has become the biggest annual civic event in Australia. Some Indigenous Australian events are now included. However, since at least 1938, the date of Australia Day has also been marked by Indigenous Australians and those sympathetic to the cause. Mourning that is seen as the invasion of the land by the British and the start of colonization, protesting its celebration as a national holiday. These groups sometimes refer to 26 January as Invasion Day, Survival Day, or Day of Mourning to observe it as a counter-celebration and advocate that the date should be changed or that the holiday should be abolished entirely. History. Arrival of the First Fleet. On 13 May 1787, a fleet of 11 ships, which came to be known as the First Fleet, was sent by the British Admiralty from England to New Holland. Under the command of Captain Arthur Phillip, the fleet sought to establish a penal colony at Botany Bay on the coast of New South Wales, which had been explored and claimed by Lieutenant James Cook in 1770. The settlement was seen as necessary because of the loss of the 13 colonies in North America. The fleet arrived between 18 and 20 January 1788, but it was immediately apparent that Botany Bay was unsuitable. On 21st January, Phillip and a few officers traveled to Port Jackson, 12 kilometers, 7.5 miles to the north, to see if it would be a better location for a settlement. They stayed there until 23rd January. Phillip named the site of their landing Sydney Cove after the Home Secretary, Thomas Townsend, 1st Viscount Sydney. They also made contact with the local Aboriginal people. They returned to Botany Bay on the evening on the 23rd January, when Phillip gave orders to move the fleet to Sydney Cove the next morning, 24th January. That day, there was a huge gale blowing, making it impossible to leave Botany Bay, so they decided to wait till the next day, 25th January. However, during 24th January, they spotted the ships Astrolabe and Boussole flying the French flag at the entrance to Botany Bay. They were having as much trouble getting into the bay as the first fleet was having getting out. On 25th January, the gale was still blowing. The fleet tried to leave Botany Bay, but only Her Majesty's ship Supply made it out, carrying Arthur Phillip, Philip Gidley King, some marines, and about 40 convicts. They anchored in Sydney Cove in the afternoon. Meanwhile, back at Botany Bay, Captain John Hunter of HMS Sirius made contact with the French ships, and he and the commander, Captain de Clonard, exchanged greetings. Clonard advised Hunter that the fleet commander was Jean-François de Gallo, Comte de la Pérouse. Sirius successfully cleared Botany Bay, but the other ships were in great difficulty. Charlotte was blown dangerously close to rocks. Friendship and Prince of Wales became entangled, both ships losing booms and or sails. Charlotte and the Friendship actually collided, and Lady Perrine nearly ran aground. Despite these difficulties, all the remaining ships finally managed to clear Botany Bay and sail to Sydney Cove on 26 January. The last ship anchored there at about 3 p.m. So it was on 26 January that the landing was made at Sydney Cove, and clearing of the ground for an encampment immediately began. Then, according to Phillip's accounts, in the evening on the 26th, the colors were displayed on shore, and the governor with several of his principal officers and others assembled round the flagstaff, drank the king's health and success to the settlement, with all that display of form which on such occasions is esteemed propitious, because it enlivens the spirits and fills the imagination with pleasing presages. The voyage of Governor Phillip to Botany Bay. The formal establishment of the colony of New South Wales did not, however, occur on 26 January as is commonly assumed. It did not occur until 7th February 1788, when the formal proclamation of the colony and Arthur Phillip's governorship were read out. The vesting of all land in the reigning monarch, King George III, also dates from 7th February 1788. First 50 years, 1788 to 1838. Although there was an official recognition of the colony's anniversary with the New South Wales almanacs of 1886 and 1808, placing no special significance to 26 January. By 1808, the date was being used by the colony's immigrants, especially the emancipated convicts, to celebrate their love of the land they lived in, with drinking and merriment. The 1808 celebrations followed this pattern, beginning at sunset of 25th January and lasting into the night, the chief toast of the occasion being Major George Johnson. Johnston had the honor of being the first officer ashore from the First Fleet, having been carried from the landing boat on the back of convict James Russe. Despite suffering the ill effects of a fall from his gig on the way home to Annandale, Johnston led the officers of the New South Wales Corps in arresting Governor William Blake on the following day, 26 January 1808, in what became known as the Rum Rebellion. Almanacs started mentioning First Landing Day or Foundation Day, and successful immigrants started holding anniversary dinners. In 1817, the Sydney Gazette and New South Wales Advertiser reported on one of these unofficial gatherings at the home of Isaac Nichols. On Monday, the 7th old dinner party met at the house of Mr. Isaac Nichols for the purpose of celebrating the anniversary of the institution of this colony under Governor Phillip, which took place on 26 January 1788, but this year happening upon a Sunday. The commemoration dinner was reserved for the day following. The party assembled were select and about 40 in number. At 5 in the afternoon, dinner was on table, and the more agreeable entertainment could not have been anticipated. After dinner, a number of loyal toasts were drunk, and a number of festive songs given, and about 10 the company parted well gratified with the pleasures that the meeting had afforded. This is from the Sydney Gazette and New South Wales Advertiser. 1880 was the 3rd anniversary of the founding of the colony, and Governor Lachlan Macquarie chose to acknowledge the day with the first official celebration. The governor declared that the day would be a holiday for all government workers, granting each an extra allowance of £1, about 450 grams of fresh meat. An order 30-gun salute at Dave's Point, one for each year that the colony had existed. This began a tradition that was retained by the governors that were to follow. Foundation Day, as it was known at the time, continued to be officially celebrated in New South Wales, and in doing so became connected with sporting events. One of these became a tradition that is still continued today. In 1837, the first running of what would become the Australia Day regatta was held on Sydney Harbour. 5 races were held for different classes of boats, from first-class sailing vessels to watermen's skiffs, and people viewed the festivities from boats on shore and from the decks of boats on the harbour, including the steamboat Australian and the Francis Freeling, the later running aground during the festivities and having to be refloated the next day. Happy with the success of the regatta, the organizers resolved to make it annual. event. However, some of the celebrations had gained an air of elitism, with the United Australians dinner being limited to those born in Australia. In describing the dinner, the Sydney Herald justified the decision, saying, "The parties who associated themselves under the title of United Australians have been censured for adopting a principle of exclusiveness. It is not fair so to censor them. If they invited immigrants to join them, they would give offense to another class of persons, while if they invited all, they would be subject to the presence of persons with whom they might not wish to associate. That was a good reason. The Australians had a perfect right to dine together if they wished it, and no one has a right to complain." From the Sydney Herald. The following year, 1838, was the 47th anniversary of the founding of the colony, and as a part of the celebration, Australia's first public holiday was declared. The regatta was held for a second time, and people crowded the four shores to view the events or joined the five steamers, Maitland, Experiment, Australia Rapid, and the miniature steamer Firefly, to view the proceedings from the water. At midday, 40 guns were fired from Dave's battery as the Royal Standard was raised, and in the evening rockets and other fireworks lit the sky. The dinner was a smaller affair than the previous year, with only 14 attendants compared to the 160 from 1837, and the anniversary as a whole was described as a day for everyone. Prior to 1888, 26 January was very much a New South Wales affair, as each of the colonies had their own commemorations for their founding. In Tasmania, Regatta Day occurred initially in December to mark the anniversary of the landing of Abel Tasman. South Australia celebrated Proclamation Day on 28 December. Western Australia had their own Foundation Day, now Western Australia Day, on 1st June. In 1888, all colonial capitals except Adelaide celebrated Anniversary Day. In 1910, South Australia adopted 26 January as Foundation Day to replace another holiday known as Accession Day, which had been held on 22nd January to mark the accession of the throne of King Edward VII, who died in May 1910. The first Australia Day was established in response to Australia's involvement in World War I. In 1915, the mother of four servicemen taught up the idea of National Day with the specific aim of raising funds for wounded soldiers, and the term was coined to stir up patriotic feelings. In 1915, a committee to celebrate Australia Day was formed, and the date chosen was 30 July, on which many fundraising efforts were run to support the war effort. It was also held in July in subsequent years of World War I, on 28 July 1916, 27 July 1917, and 26 July 1980. Victoria adopted 26 January as Australia Day in 1931, and by 1935, all states of Australia were celebrating 26 January as Australia Day, although it was still known as Anniversary Day in New South Wales. The name Foundation Day persisted in local usage. In 1988, the celebration of 200 years since the arrival of the first fleet was organized on a large scale, with many significant events taking place in all major cities. Over 2.5 million people attended the event in Sydney. These included street parties, concerts, including performances of the steps and forecourt of the Sydney Opera House, and at many other public venues as art and literary competitions, historic reenactments, and the opening of the Powerhouse Museum at its new location. A reenactment of the arrival of the First Fleet took place in Sydney Harbour, with ships that had sailed from Portsmouth a year earlier taking part. Since 1988, participation in Australia Day has increased, and in 1994, all states and territories began to celebrate a unified public holiday on the actual day for the first time. Previously, some states had celebrated the public holiday on a Monday or Friday to ensure a long weekend. Research conducted in 2007 reported that 28% of Australians polled attended an organized Australia Day event, and a further 26% celebrated with family and friends. Outdoor concerts, community barbecues, sports competitions, festivals, and fireworks are some of the many events held in communities across Australia. These official events are presented by the National Australia Day Council, an official council or committee in each state and territory, and local committees. Citizenship ceremonies are also commonly held, with Australia Day now the largest occasion for the acquisition of Australian citizenship. On 26 January 2011, more than 300 citizenship ceremonies took place, and around 13,000 people from 143 countries took Australian citizenship. In recent years, many citizenship ceremonies have included an affirmation by existing citizens, possibly reflecting a shift in Australians' understanding of the place of Indigenous Australians in their national identity. News poll research in November 2008 2009 reported that 90% of Australians polled believed it was important to recognize Australia's Indigenous people and culture as part of Australia Day celebrations. A similar proportion agreed that it is important to recognize the cultural diversity of the nation. Despite the strong attendance of Australia Day events and the positive disposition towards the recognition of Indigenous Australians, the date of the celebrations remains a source of challenge and national discussion. Change the date movement. Some Australians regard Australia Day as a symbol of the adverse impacts of British settlement on Australia's Indigenous peoples. In 1888, prior for the first centennial anniversary of the First Fleet landing on 26 January 1788, New South Wales Premier Henry Parkes was asked about the inclusion of Aboriginal people in the celebrations. He replied, "And remind them that we have robbed them." Crowds estimated as high as 80,000 turned out in an Invasion Day protest in Melbourne alone in 2019, and rallies were held across the country. On 12 November 2019, following an annual survey, the Inner West Council became the first local authority in Sydney to end Australia Day celebrations, encouraging residents instead to attend the Aboriginal Yabun Festival held on that day. The council will still hold a citizenship ceremony on that day. Suggested alternative dates. Federation of Australia, 1st January. As early as 1957, 1st January was suggested as a possible alternative day to commemorate the Federation of Australia. Federation of Australia Alternative Day. 19th January, proposed as an alternative because it is only 1 week earlier than Australia Day and can represent the year of Federation. 81st. Independence Day, 3rd March. Anzac Day, 25th April. May 8th, opening of the first federal parliament, anniversary of the 1967 referendum, acceptance of the Constitution, Wattle Day, 10th file rotation, or Eureka Stockades.